Hi, it's Ted Shaw in the Windsor Star News Cafe, and today I have two of my colleagues with me. On my far right, Marty Beneteau, Editor-in-Chief, and right next to me here is Craig Pearson. And these two gentlemen have been, were responsible, partly responsible and largely responsible for the production of the book, which the title page of which, or the cover of which you see behind me on the screen, called From the Vault. It's a 400-page collection of articles and primarily photographs from the Windsor Star's archives, dating from, what was it, the 1880s to 1950? There,
right up to 1950.
Right up to 1950.
Yeah.
It's the first of a projected 2-volume set. It's a wonderful book. If every picture tells 1,000 stories, or 1,000 tells 1,000 stories?
Tells 1,000 words. This one tells 1,000 times 1,000 because there's more than 1,000 pictures.
There are more than 1,000 pictures. Yeah. It's probably going to be on everybody's Christmas wish list. At least we hope so. And at less than $40 per book, the price point is certainly very attractive. I'll ask Marty, who wrote a foreword for the book, how the whole project came about.
Okay, thanks. This was entirely the initiative of Dan Wells and Biblioasis, the local Windsor area and very prolific publisher. Dan contacted us and said he had this idea for a book, and if we would just grant him access to our archives, photographic archives, he'd like to go and have a look-see, and what he would find would form the guts of this book. And I didn't think a whole lot of it because I think Dan had a better idea of what was in the archives than I did. Because upon seeing the book, it took my breath away to see the richness, the depth of this photography that's been sitting under our very noses all these years. And so it was really their initiative. We came to a very quick agreement that yes, this is something we want to do. We want to share this with the community, and off they went. They sent a researcher up into our archives, and then they handled everything from that point on in terms of collecting and aggregating this photography.
Now, Craig, you wrote most of the passages, the words of the book.
Right.
I think you told me about 35,000 words you composed for this book. Tell me about some of your experiences going into the archives and researching them.
Well, actually, Dan Wells and his crew from Biblioasis did most of the actually going to the archives, playing with the pictures. I did do a lot of that right at the end when we were running out of time, so I was doing that. And coming to them at the very last minute saying, you absolutely got to get this last picture in, and you know, them going, oh my goodness, what is this guy doing? But yeah, it was a lot of research. Who's counting? But it's actually 450 pages. And what I did was the chapter introductions were actually small chapters themselves, so almost 35,000 words, and I just spent much of 2 years learning about Windsor. And I have to say, Windsor has a great story to tell. I loved having access to those photographs, by the way. Thanks for letting us do it. Because I agree with you, they're fabulous photos. A lot of photos people have never seen before, especially today. I mean, these are going to be new to most people looking at them. I think they're great. And yeah, the whole process helped me learn a lot about the city, and I hope it lets other people learn a lot about it too.
Were there any surprising aspects of Windsor's history?
Yeah, I would say there was a number of them. One of them is we've had all this big publicity, international headlines with Detroit going bankrupt. In fact, Windsor beat Detroit to the punch. It almost did the same thing in 1935. And that's because the Ontario government actually imposed that on us. We had to amalgamate by order of Ontario, lest we go bankrupt. So Windsor amalgamated with Sandwich, East Windsor, which was actually Ford City to start, and Walkerville. Walkerville did not want to amalgamate because they were actually doing quite well, but it was forced in 1935. It happened, and it sort of saved the city. That's one of the things, but I tell you, it's just a bunch of things that I learned about, and one of them was how much we literally set history for the rest of Canada and Ontario. Because we were at the border, we helped through border skirmishes. We actually helped set the actual physical border. But beyond that, we had dealings with the states, and Detroit in particular, that would amaze anybody when you're looking back into it, how much Detroit was part of Windsor growing up and how much we were part of Detroit. There was no border at that point. There was only a river. And so we learned an awful lot from one another. We grew up together, and we helped set U.S.-Canada relations.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, most people know of some of the major events. There's a whole chapter on rum running and a lot of photographs about that era.
Right.
There's a chapter on our participation in the Second World War. There's all kinds of different interesting stories. The tornado that hit in the, was it 1940s?
1946, 17 people killed, still one of the most deadliest twisters in Canadian history.
And of course, the collapse of the curling rink, which was another story.
Well, that's one to come, but that one happened after
1950.
1950, so we haven't got to that one yet. But Ted, just because you said so, we're getting there.
Okay.
Okay.
So the book itself covers such a wide space of time, a long space of time, that it really is difficult to absorb in one sitting. But I think just leafing through the pictures is an experience in itself. And there's so many photographs in there.
It is.
So many. And I'm sure a lot of people who have been reading the Windsor Star for years or raised their families in Windsor will recognize some of their relatives in this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a book designed to be consumed in one sitting either, because, like I said, there are more than 1,100 pictures, more than 450 pages. There's lots to look at, but also lots to read. I like to point that out, given I'm the one who wrote it. But, you know, there's so much to learn that I think that people are going to want to spend a little bit more time with it, want to go through it slowly, because you couldn't possibly absorb it. This is not sort of one of those books that you might find that's kind of a fun snapshots and whatnot. This is meant to be a reference book, a nuts and bolts, one-stop shop where you can find out what happened in Windsor. You cannot find it anywhere else. There's no other place that will have as many pictures like this, or I don't think as many words on a sort of a general history level. So I'm really proud of it, and I'm looking forward to the launch.
What about other newspapers in the chain, Marty? Are they somewhat envious of our accomplishment in this regard?
Actually, I've had some interest from Post Media to learn more about this project, how it came together, and how it might be applicable to other papers. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that it's taken so long for this to happen. And it really took a publisher like Biblioasis to take this on for us and partner with us. But I can see this. Being applied and scaled to other markets. And I just add, like, as a Windsor native, this has a special meaning for me. This book. I mean, you can look at it from two perspectives. If you're a Windsor native, you're going to look at this with great pride and interest. If you're not a Windsor native, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot about how we came to be the way we are. We're a very unique community, as you've come to learn. And so it has sort of those two dual appeals, in my view.
Or Windsor natives born after 1950. I mean, you know, this period is really the period of our grandparents or our great uncles
and great grandparents. I mean, it started from the beginning of Windsor's history. Yeah. You know, I believe it was 1728. The first Assumption Parish started. It was moved from the Detroit shores to Bois Blanc, which is known now as Boblo, and then in 47 to the Windsor shore. So it's from way back when, coming before there was actually even pictures in the Windsor Star. But the Windsor Star's roots go back to 1860. There's a chapter on the Windsor Star, fittingly. It started as a weekly in 1860, but it became a daily in 1890.
And what goes around comes around. We've had some recent news about Assumption Parish.
Right. It makes it. That's the other thing too. You know, it puts things into context. So I'm glad you brought that up, because Assumption Parish happens to be the most historic building in Windsor, in my opinion, because Windsor grew up around it. Now, it's because I was researching this book. I learned so much about it that I know that, and that's what I hope people who read it can take away from that as well. Mm-hmm. Put things in context and say, wow, Assumption Church is important because of its historic ties. That's something you can get with the book.
Now, there have been other pictorial histories of the city, but I don't think anything has been done on this scale or as lavishly done as Biblioasis has done it. It's just a gorgeous book.
Well, thank you. And I do agree that it's elaborate. I don't think that there's been anything of this scale. I certainly haven't seen it, and Dan Wells, the publisher of Biblioasis, says there has not been anything on this scale, and it's his business basically to know what's out there. So, yeah.
Now you use some. You use people like Marty Gervais, Carl Morgan for some of your sources.
Right.
Tell me about some of the other resources you use.
Well, I didn't do live interviews for it. I researched it from books. So yeah, I used Marty Gervais' books and Carl Morgan's book, but there's a whole bunch of different books out there, even small ones. I found self-published books. I found essays in magazines that were hard to find, that to be able to flesh out everything that there's there. And of course, the websites today, we use a lot of websites as well for Windsor Police, firefighters, those kinds of things. I mean, there's chapters on pretty much anything you might want to look into, I think. So.
And how long did this take you to write?
Well, my involvement started in the spring of 2013. That's when I started researching. But it started even before that. Dan Wells approached you, I don't know, January, February of 2013.
Yeah, it's been 2 years easily in the making.
Coinciding more or less with the Star's move to this new location.
Yeah, it was a great coincidence for us that this came about as a result at the same time of our move. But also next year we will be celebrating our 125th anniversary of the Star, and this is going to be a great piece to have as part of that celebration and to share with our readers. You know, the Star itself has had various iterations through the years, has not always been known as the Windsor Star as we know, but our roots do go back 125 years. We'll celebrate that next year. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to peel back the curtain on an archive of photography that I didn't even know existed. And also to not forget that this is an homage to photography. You know, and the devices and equipment these photographers had to use in this time was so incredibly primitive compared to what is used today, and also demanded a whole different skill set. I mean, things were not automated back then. Every setting had to be carefully established. The speed graphic camera only came into being in the 40s as photographers were covering the war. So prior to that, and then most of the photography reflected in this, they were using completely different technology, if you could even call it technology, and the skills that they applied resulted in these incredible pictures and this just richly layered history.
Craig, all the time you were writing this book, of course, you had a full-time job.
Yes, I did. I'm a reporter at the Windsor Star, so of course I was doing that the whole time. I did this actually by committing nights and weekends and vacation days insanity.
And you're a family man too.
I'm a family man too, yes. And I learned a lot of things, not just about Windsor, but about writing a book. For instance, I learned that when you finish the last chapter, your publisher will add another. So it was one of those never-ending projects, but I had fun doing it.
Yeah, great. And it's officially launched on November 23rd, I believe?
I believe November 27th.
27th,
is the launch party here at the Windsor Star News Cafe.
Okay,
that's correct.
Copies of the book aren't yet available. They're still at the printer, but I was told yesterday by Biblioasis that they should be available by the end of next week. So I would think that certainly on November 27th you'll be able to get yourself a copy. But perhaps before then at the store, so you maybe call Biblioasis. I would like to thank Dan Wells. He was out of town for this interview, but certainly he was, as Marty said, a very key element in the production of this book. And I'll tell you, I have read a galley proof of it, and it is certainly one of the best reads you're going to find, and especially if you're from Windsor or have relatives in Windsor. And thank you, gentlemen, for doing this with me today.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us.